Okay, I have the honor of introducing our speaker, our own Jim McDermott. Normally something bad happens when Jim speaks.
It's gonna snow? It's the machine, not me. Oh,
Usually the projector fails or the computer fails. So let's keep our fingers crossed and see if Jim can get through this.
Where are the lights?
they're in the kitchen, on the right-hand side, or
Don't turn them all off.
make a left. There you go. All right, how many people watch Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune? Okay. Well, a couple months ago, I think about presentations, and what I came up with, there's a lot of terms that I don't know. I figured after 15 or 20 years I'd know most of this. So I started looking through the Red Book about grading, about abbreviations, about references, and I originally started out, I only wanted to do 20, and I ended up with 42 different things to look at. So it's divided in part 1, 2. I'm going to do part 1 tonight, and if you like it, then we'll do part 2 some other time. But I want to give you a hint. I'm going to be putting, the first slide will be abbreviations of something. So you have to be able to tell me what it stands for and what particular coin or currency it belongs to. So the last club that I went to, I've done this twice. The first club, there was only one that they couldn't get, and at Westchester they were able to get them all. So we're going to see, we're going to test your knowledge. There's going to be not only the references are also going to be people who have specialized in one particular type of coin, and they usually give it a number. And they're the people that if you collect that, you get their book, and you use that to determine what the varieties are that you have. So you'll catch on pretty quick, Kenny. FBL. Okay, and what does what type of coin does it belong to?
50-cent piece.
Franklin.
Okay. All right, now, a lot of people confuse what a full bell line is. So that there's lines at the top that go through the bell, and then there's some at the bottom. And to have a full designation for those lines have to be pretty crisp and clear. And also, the line at the bottom is broken because of a crack. So you're not going to have a continuous line. Now here's an example of what we were talking about. Here you have the 3 lines that go through, and then the double line. And this is a good example of a full bell line.
What happened?
Go ahead.
What happened if the line of the crack is not?
It's not relative to the... No, it's not relative. You must have those lines though. As you can see here where the crack is, the lines are broken, but what they're really looking for is the 3 individual lines here and the 2 there. Now, why is this important? This is the price of coins, and I just selected some of them in MS 65 and 66. But you'll also notice that the full bell line price, how much they go up. Now, I was really startled about this one that really stands out on this page. It's 1953S. I looked at 2 books and I said, well, wait a minute. It costs $100 in MS 65 and $25,000 for a full bell line. So I looked at 2 or 3 different sources, and that's the price. Apparently, that year, it's very hard to find something that has a real good strike. Now, I don't know how many people would pay $25,000 for a full bell line in that, but if you look down the list from 49D to 62 in these samples, you can see the price, the big difference in price for full bell lines. So, I mean, if you want to go out and do some cherry picking, if it goes to a third-party grading service, you're going to end up paying probably close to some of these prices. One of our members, Ed Baker, has a very nice collection of Franklin halves, and a lot of his are full bell lines. Binary note. We're going to currency now. 2 digits, okay? Okay, on a binary note, what you're looking for is the note itself will only have 2 different digits in it. For example, in this note, you have a 1-4, 1-4, and then another example would be 1-3-3, 1-1, 1-3-3, 1-3. So basically a binary note is any note where you just have 2 digits are represented for the serial number on the note. 4 diamonds. Indian head penny. Okay? Now, if you go on eBay or some of the other sources, one of the things that people try to tell you is for grading purposes, the 4 diamonds are right here by the Indian's headdress. And a lot of people say, well, if you have 4 diamonds, it's a very high grade coin. The thing is, if you look in the Red Book and you look at some of the other major dealers, this is a nice thing to have, but it's not what you use for grading. What most people look at first is the Liberty. How many letters of Liberty is shown in the headdress. So a full set of characters for Liberty would at least make it extra finer before. And then if you really want to get really finicky, Richard Snow, who is a specialist in Indian head sense, he looks at particularly at the top of the feathers, which usually wear pretty quickly. So although the 4 diamonds is important, some people think on eBay, because it has 4 diamonds, it's good. But these other characteristics is what you should be looking for grading. FT.
Full torch.
He'd be sharp, okay. What does it belong to?
Roosevelt.
Okay. Recently, these have been getting a lot of publicity, and you used to be able to cherry pick some of these. But just like the Franklin half, these particular ones, or the Mercury dime, what they're looking for a full torch is these individual lines on the torch must be separated so that you can see 2 different lines. And in addition to that, the torch up here has to have a lot of detail. Now, most of the coins that are sent in are usually at least MS-66. There are a few 65, but most of them are 66 and 67. So why is this important? Oh, excuse, okay. Just go back. The price of these are pretty high. I forgot it didn't have the chart in here on this. But if you find one and you can get it sent in and graded, you will get a fair amount more for the Roosevelt dime. And because it's a modern day coin from 46 to the current, you can make out pretty good by looking through some dimes and sending them in for grading.
Does that apply to the proof and the silver proof?
It could be either one, but most of them are graded at least MS-66. So you want to make sure that if you're going to send it in for grading, it has to have these characteristics, at least this. A lot of the dimes will have this double line, but the torch won't have the detail necessary to grade it much higher. Low number.
Serial number.
Huh?
Currency serial number.
No. Anybody else?
Mintage.
Low numbers represent a fella who came up with a catalog, and it represents part-time tokens. The fella, Leonard Lowe, back in the 1860s, actually came up with a catalog of about 110, 120 hard-time tokens, and the next slide will show you an example. Now, this is a low number 49. It's a half cent. A lot of you have seen these hard-time tokens, which were prevalent around the Civil War and probably 15 or 20 years before that. Most hard-time tokens run between about 1833 to about 1840, 45 or so. But he was the first one to catalog this, and this is one of the examples I was saying about a person who took a lot of interest in one coin and decided to catalog it. HTT number,
Hard time token.
hard time token, okay? Now, what confuses people is, here's the same coin. You have a low number 49, but it's a hard time token 73. Well, later on, they discovered a lot more coins than 120 that low catalog. So there's about 320 hard time tokens. But what's confusing is, if you go to buy a hard time token, you have to really know both these numbers, because some people will only put the low number, some people will put the hard time token number. And in this example, you'll see two of these. Matter of fact, the one cent over there is actually a hard time token, and that's low number 120. There's about 13 varieties of that, depending on the number of berries on the back. This fellow, Russell Rao, he came out with a book. I have the second edition. If you're ever interested in hard time tokens and patriotic tokens, this is a very good book. It's about the size of a telephone book, and it's pretty complete. You can get individual books on hard time tokens, but if you want one book to see what the coin is and what rarity it is, this is probably the easiest one to have. Now, the problem is some of the prices aren't current, but the good thing is you can look in here and say, well, this is a valuable coin or it's not. And then you can judge whether you want to pay either more, or you figure out what your collection is worth. Birthday note.
Yeah, it's a currency that's, the serial number is like 0627.
Represents a birthday. All right, here's a good one. 04, 09, 2001. So if you look at that, what does it represent? April the 9th, 2001. Now I know Joe, every time he gets in line for something, he looks at every paper note he has, and he's great for picking these out. And he gave me a lot of information on most of these currencies, because I really didn't know that much about it, but I found it very interesting, the type of currency notes that people collect. Spiked chin,
Half cent.
half cent. What year?
1804.
1804. This is it. I have one of these in a fairly nice shape. The big thing that you can see right away is the spiked chin. It's because of the dies that they used back then, and they got damaged. And if you see a true spiked chin, not only will it have a spiked chin, but you'll see these ripples on this. And one of the fellows that Joe mentioned, Steve Ellsworth, had a couple of these. And what was really interesting, he had a couple in different grades, but every one that you picked up was exactly the same with the different die varieties with the spiked chin. This is the price that they, pretty current from the gray sheet when I did the presentation, represents pretty much what you're going to pay for it. If you get a nice one, very fine or extra fine, it's really a nice looking coin, and it's great if you're having a typeset. If you want something a little bit different and you're only going to buy one coin, this is a nice one to have. Three-legged. What year? Okay. Okay, here's a three-legged buffalo, 37D. On the left is the buffalo with 4 legs, and on the right is the 3.5. Well, I had purchased one of these a couple of years ago, and I sat down, and the coin dealer told me, he said, do you know what the difference is, how you can tell? I said, well, one of the legs is missing. He said, no. He said, there's another diagnostic that you have to make sure that's real. If you look at the legitimate, authentic three-legged buffalo, you'll see these disturbed scents on the surface of the coin, like little bubbles. And it was described to me, it's like the buffalo is peeing. So what people have done, you can have somebody take this leg out and try to make a counterfeit out of it, but they can't reproduce these bubbles because it's actually on the surface of the coin. And if you see it and you turn it different ways, you can see it. Now, these are pretty expensive, and they're one of the varieties in the Buffalo nickels that probably one of the 3 or 4 that are most expensive. And they can go anywhere from $550 to $2,500 for something that's really in MS-60. Pointed or rounded bust. Indian head cent. Okay, I suppose you know I like Indian head cents, but this 1860 variety, they had 2 different die types. So if you collect, you'll be sure to know. It's very hard for me to determine these unless I have 2 of them beside each other. But the most important thing is if you look at the pointed bust, it is much smaller than this. And you also notice that when you see the coin, there's less distance between the one and the actual bust itself versus this. So it's an interesting variety type, and it's one of the things that when you collect Indian heads, it's just one of the things that you'd like to know. Accented hair. Kennedy, what year? Okay. This is a 1964 Kennedy half-proof. People went crazy with Kennedy coins when they first came out. The one on the left is a regular Kennedy coin, and this is the accented coin. Now, the easiest way to determine this, when I brought these 2 pictures up in the description, is if you look at the distance and the quality of hair design here versus here, it's pretty obvious. And it's probably the best place to look. There is also more detail up in here, but right here is the best place to see the detail. Now these are still pretty reasonable. You can get one in MS-65. The regular 64 proof for about $20, but the accented proof is worth about twice as much, $45. Bookend notes. Bookend notes, you have a sequence of digits that are the same at the beginning and the end. For example, here you have 8-4, 8-4. And again, there's a lot of different notes. I've never looked at serial numbers when I started doing this. Now I start looking at all my $1 bills. So it's kind of interesting, but that's a bookend, just like you would have a bookend for your books at home. 7 or 8 tail feathers. Okay. I've always had trouble seeing this till I found this chart, and I really, really liked it a lot because it was more descriptive. The 1878 Morgan dollars came out in really 3 different varieties. Here, it's very easy to count the 8 tail feathers, and then the 7 tail feathers here. But what always threw me was, well, where's the 7 over 8? And when I saw this, all of a sudden it made sense to me that here you have your 7 tail feathers, but if you look down here, here's where the 7 is over the 8. So I learned a lot from doing that, and this is a very good picture to me, and describes the 3 different varieties. DMPL. Okay. Deep mirror proof light. These are particularly, this description usually is followed on mostly Morgan dollars. You'll find some peace dollars. The surface of this coin, if you've ever seen one, is really beautiful. It is almost like a mirror. Now, one of the other coin club members had told me that if you take one of these and put it on a table and you shine a light on it and you have a piece of paper here, you're supposed to be able to read that piece of paper from this coin. So that was one of the things. Now, these also will cost you a little bit more money. You're going to pay a premium for it. but if you ever have one, they're a beautiful coin. They could be deep mirror proof on both the front and the reverse. So it's a nice looking coin. R1 to R10. Rarity guide. Okay. Now, as I said before, a lot of people, when they get particularly interested in one particular type of coin or a series of coins, they wanted to figure out how rare they are. So you can have a hard time token, or you can have a bust half of 1 year, and it's a common coin, and you can have one that maybe it's an overstrike or 4/2, and it's much rarer. So a lot of people, I always thought that there was only 1 or 2 rarity guys. In doing this, I found that there were 13. Okay, I didn't do all 13, but this is the different types of rarity guides that people have put out. I'm more familiar with the hard time and the Civil War token. Now, what people have done, they've gone through and even, say a coin was minted with 40,000 business strikes. Over a period of years, some of them have been melted down. Some people take in consideration the numbers that have shown up at different coin shows, and they rank the coins from R1 to R9 or whatever. The most important thing to know about this is basically an R1 is a very common coin. There's a lot of issues. You won't have a hard time finding it, but it'll be pretty reasonable. If it gets to be an R8 or R9, it's going to be a R9 or R8. There's usually, there's only 1 or 2, or they're called unique, and they're very hard to find. If you want to collect a coin, a hard time token, and you see it's an R9, you're going to look long and hard, and you're going to pay a lot more money. So the bottom line is all of these people, okay, have come up with a grading system for their coin. Not only have they taken in consideration the mintage, but they've also looked at the population that's left. So that, again, you can have a variety of coin that has a high mintage, but it could be rare because there's not that many around. And the Morgan dollars is another one. The guy, Van Allen, I don't know if you've ever seen their book. It's like a telephone book too, and it's very complete. But at least you know by looking and finding the type of coin in there. Again, R1 is common. Once it gets above it, probably a 7 or 8, you're going to pay more money. Then 8 or 9, it's going to be quite a bit more expensive. MPC.
Military payment certificate.
Okay.
Jim, you got a question back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm curious, if the errors on the mint for, certain coin errors are also subject to this rarity guide?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It can be, if you look at one of these rarity guys, for example, that Russell Rao, he'll say in there, this is a Civil War token from 1837. The variety is an R4. So it's not common, but you'll find it. Now, that same coin could have a die variety. I don't know, maybe the ship was going the wrong way or a different die was used. So you have one that's an R4 and one's an R8. The other thing is, especially with Civil War tokens and patriotic tokens, the type of metal used. It could be copper, it could be brass, it could be German silver, and there's very, very few gold. But you can have the same coin, same mint, no variety, but the difference in the metal could change it from an R1, R2, all the way up to an R8 or 9.
Jim,
Oh, I'm
does
sorry.
it take into consideration the grading, or is it just the total number in circulation?
No, in that, what you'll find, they'll give you an R9, and then they'll have the same thing. They'll have fine, very fine, and extra fine beside it. What this is usually primarily used for is to determine how rare it is, and then you have to look at the condition of the coin also. So if you have an R4 and it's good, it's worth a certain amount of money. If you have a R4 and it's AU or uncirculated, it's going to be worth a lot more money. It's very similar to the Red Book. The problem with some of these, they're not definitive for every grade. They'll go fine, very fine, maybe AU, but it gives you an idea what it's worth. So you can determine from there. NPC, somebody had already mentioned it.
Military savings.
Okay. These were primarily issued to military personnel overseas. Joe was very good about telling his story about Vietnam. These were issued to the military to buy things on the commerce in the country that they were in. Problem is, a lot of times people would make extra copies of this, and what they would do is recall them in a very short period of time. So Joe gave me the story that one day they decided the next day you had to turn all your military script or military payment certificates in for new ones that had just come out, so that people couldn't reproduce the old ones. So it's an interesting thing. Now, you'll see a lot of these, particularly the Philippines, during the Second World War. They're pretty reasonable because a lot of them were issued, but there are some rare ones. On eBay, for the Filipino issue, you can get them from 50 cents to $5, $10, $20. And some of them, if they're used, you can pay $15, $20 for them. But there are some that are very expensive and that are unusual. Circulated strike.
Pocket change.
Pocket change, right. Basically, a circulated coin was something that's supposed to go into circulation versus the proof. And anybody that's seen a proof before, you can see the mirror finish on these that is supposed to distinguish between the two. Ladder note.
It's a note that goes, if it's a perfect ladder, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 would be the
Okay.
serial number. And you get broken ladders, which is just
Okay.
one digit,
Shows-
but they're not in order.
Absolutely correct. Now, here's a perfect example where the serial number goes from 1 to 8, but you can also have a progressive or regressive one where it turns over. So you go from 3 to 0 or 0 to 9. So it can be ascending or descending. Again, it's an interesting thing. So if you find a note like this, it's something a little bit unusual. A mule.
Struck on a different planchet.
Okay. John's good on this. John hit it right on the nose. It's a coin that was struck with two different dies that are a little bit unusual. They're not necessarily the same type of coin. Now, here are three examples. This one, the obverse shows $0.25, and then reverse shows $1. So that's definitely a mule. You can also have a mule where you have the obverse and reverse were both struck on both sides. And then this is another good example. You have a Lincoln cent, 1999, and then on the reverse it shows $1. So these are all good examples of mules.
They're non-magician coins.
David?
And just to make a point, there's also a mule with paper money.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, for the plate numbers, they're in different fonts
Yeah.
on front and back.
Oh, really? So the front could be one size and the back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why didn't you tell me that before? That's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Trying to find.
SMS. Okay. As most of you know, during 65 to 67, the Mint decided not to make proof sets, so they came out with these special Mint sets. Now, if you look at these, they're better than a regular circulated strike, and yet they're pretty close to Mint. And then, of course, back in 1968, they went back to proofs. These are pretty reasonably priced. You can buy them for, I don't know, $5 to $8. They're pretty reasonable. Over the number. What denomination?
Must have. Early has.
Okay. Overton, again, we were talking about someone who specialized, he specialized in early half dollars, 1794 to 1836. He made several different books. He passed away in '85. I believe they're up to a third or fourth edition. And this fellow who, at the time, was assisting him with this book, Don Parsley, has put out, I think he's up to about the fifth issue. Now, if you collect the early half dollars, this is the guy, this is the reference, because he goes into so much detail. There's so many different half dollar varieties, and this is a good example. Kenny just put up. It's very depictive. This is a page of one of the books. You see the obverse, reverse, and he goes into a description of what the front and what the reverse would be. So a lot of people, like they say, buy the book before you buy the coin. Well, this is certainly a good one, because there's a lot of people who try to cherry pick things. There's different coins out there that have different varieties, and the price can vary quite a bit between a common coin and then one that has a different variety. Watermelon note.
1891,000.
Okay. What I found, this was very interesting. This note actually went up for sale in Baltimore this past October. And there's only a couple of these known. But what the water note represents is, on the back you can see the 3 zeros look like watermelons. Of course it has General George Meade on it. But what I really found interesting is there's another $500 note, but this particular note with the buyer's fee came out to a little over $2 million. So that's a pretty good amount for this. I understand there was a lot of competition for this because it's so rare. Dave, you've probably seen a few of these.
I've seen quite a few of them.
Yeah, but they're fairly expensive, so a little bit out of my league. Okay.
I think we're done.
And that ends the show. Like I said, that was part 1, and I have another 20. I found it interesting to do because I learned a lot. Matter of fact, I learned some things tonight that I didn't know. So later, a month or 2 from now, if you want to see part 2, it's very similar to this, but it's completely different as far as currency, the type of coins, and then the different numbers that are used for references on different types of coins. So, thank you. Oh, and I'd like to thank my production assistant, Mr. Kenny here, for setting the computer up, and we had no machine malfunctions, which is good.